Okay, fantastic. So we'll still have some people join in, but we'll begin now and look forward to another wonderful session with all of you. So if you remember from last time, so this is Global Relevance in Science Communication, and this is part 2. So everyone here should have already done the part 1. And hopefully everyone has. I know some people had some difficulties getting in, but still I hope that this would be a really useful session for you to meet other colleagues and also share some ideas in our exercise and learn some new ideas as well. So this, for a quick recap of the previous session, we got to the other session and realized that there are different challenges, opportunities, terms, and definitions in use around the world. That regarding the global spread, there's ideas and formats of science communication that can spread globally. And they mainly do this by responding to our social, more than just our scientific needs. And so we were looking at the formats of a Fame Lab, Science Cafe, and Science Cafe, Fame Lab, and Pint of Science, and recognizing that they have different things, different goals that they help to achieve. So with Fame Lab, it's something that seems to be more for the researchers and scientists, and giving them a way to network with each other, and also a way to raise their confidence in communicating science. We realized that for things like Pint of Science, that it's globally done on the same day, so it's a great opportunity for people to network again, all on the same common goal within the same few days, but also that it provides an opportunity for people to tailor it to their needs locally, as did most of the formats. But Pint of Science may be limiting to some regions where the idea of having a pint is not so much of a social norm, and it might even be a social turnoff. And so it's these social reasons that allow us to spread some of these ideas more than others. And also with science cafes, that again, for the similar reasons, that it's a place where people generally socialize. And so it makes it more relaxed and makes it more appealing to many different audiences, and especially with a format that aims to link the public with scientists and lower the gaps between them, or perceived gaps, and also open up dialogue and conversations between the two. And we've also noticed that approaches should be appropriate to needs. And there are various goals that could be achieved through a globally relevant approach. But considering things like the quality of science communication and whether that is considered in the same way across the world, we've had some interesting conversations about that. Okay, so this particular session, we have particular goals, which is we want you to include more perspectives from across the globe within the design and delivery of your science communication activities to increase their relevance to global stakeholders. Also, by the end of the session, we hope that you will consider how different local contexts can influence the delivery of science communication activities, identify shared and contrasting opportunities for localization within the global field of science communication, and recognize how a local approach can be used to increase the global relevance of science communication activities. Okay, so at this point, some of you may be thinking, local, is that a typo? Have you made a mistake, John? No, I haven't. Local is a real term. We'll be looking into that now, and hopefully you'll share why I feel that this is an important factor to bring it into science communication practice, especially when we're hoping to be globally relevant. So, and just a reminder, I did ask some of you if you had any ideas or opinions on what you feel it means to be globally relevant. And I have had some people ask me, what does global relevance mean exactly? We did describe it in the last session, but I feel that maybe it might be worth me just reaffirming some of the ideas regarding global relevance. So I'll quickly just share in the chat a link to a Padlet. And you are welcome, as always, to add to this Padlet to share your ideas and opinions about this. So I'm just going to add it here. And within this Padlet, you can view it and see what I've described as global relevance, but also some other ideas from our colleagues around the world. And if you like any of them, please do give them a thumbs up. I don't want to dictate the meaning. I just have a meaning that I'm using within these workshops, but I'm absolutely open to whether you think there's any better definition or idea for global relevance. And if you have any, please do add your ideas as well. We'd really like to see, what does global relevance mean to you? Okay, so here we go. So here are some ideas about global relevance. So global relevance for me could be more about sharing and connecting knowledge and people. So we also have global relevance is about communicating in a way that makes it matter everywhere, that has meaning at local level, engages with local publics, and considers the sensitivities that may exist in the local context. And my definition that I used was the ability of a science communication product or activity to be applicable or of value to stakeholders across different nations and cultures. So please do add your own thoughts, your own ideas of what is global relevance. I'd love to hear from you. But now let's continue with this session and just keep that a broad definition in your back of your mind as we go along. And that will be open for you to access through the presentation. Okay, so global science communication and local science communication. What exactly does that mean? Well, the idea is that we're trying to put the local into global science communication. Now, we spent much of the first session, the first part of the session, looking into global science communication, the globalization of science communication, how science communication can spread from one region to many different regions. What does it entail? The hows, the whys, what is the effect, and what happens when it goes international and culturally and nationally? We looked at how there could be quality measures of science communication and whether they apply globally within different regions and different places around the world. And finally, once we were looking at the spread of science communication, what we identified often was that the ability to tailor the formats and the ideas in science communication to local contexts and sensitivities was probably the most important thing we can do within science communication, especially when trying to take ideas on a global level. So it's about putting the local into global science communication. And that's exactly what this session is all about. So the idea of localization, the term, although a Western term, the idea originally came from when Western marketing experts was speaking to their colleagues in Japan, and there was a term dochakuka. And the idea behind that was that products of Japanese origin should be localized. That is, they should be suited to local tastes and interests. Yet the products are global in application and reach. And the Western version of that idea became globalization. From hence, often we hear the terms global, localized, and globalization, and locality. When we look at localization, specifically, so the localization part of globalization, what does that entail? Many of you will find this quite obvious. For some of you, it might even be a new concept, something you didn't consider before. But for localization, it involves taking a product and making it linguistically and culturally appropriate to the target locale, country, region, and language, where it will be used and sold. So it's about cultural appropriateness and linguistic appropriateness. Also, we have this different explanation, which is widespread cultural forms are actively adapted by local people and particularized to local sensibilities, taking on local nuances, local character, and local terminology. And so the essence here is all about the local, which makes sense. And what we need to do is be aware of and responsive to the particular local needs and contexts. So when we're thinking about a global range of people, the global part, to make globally relevant science communication, is really about tailoring it to different localities, to different locales. And it struck me when I first started this project and we were hoping to achieve, to be globally relevant and produce globally relevant materials. I asked everyone, what does globally relevant mean? And people didn't really have a good definition. You couldn't say, oh, it's obviously this. It's just, I don't think anyone's thought about it. It's just, it feels obvious to say it, but what exactly does that mean? And so I had to try and look into it. And basically being aware of the local differences, I found was the most important thing, because in science communication, we're always trying to target individuals or groups, but specifically, not generally. We don't think of the public, the general public. We think of many different varied publics, and we're trying to target different publics with different approaches, whether it's children and adults, whether it's particular ethnic groups, whether it's particular genders. And we are aware that some differences require differences in approach. And so we need to be sensitive to those particular differences. And when we're speaking about a global perspective, we need to be sensitive to those local differences. So really, it's about paying attention to the local. Hence, global relevance is really about being local, in my opinion. So we need to be aware of and responsive to particular local needs and contexts, or if we're not personally aware of them, we need to partner with people who are. So I want to introduce a definition of globalization. There's a gentleman who wrote a book on the subject, and I found this definition really interesting, and I really found it enjoyable to see it, because I thought, wow, that really makes me feel I can see what globalization is trying to achieve. It says, in globalization, the global and the local shape the end state. The result is heterogeneity, or basically lots of different variations. Just like light that passes through glass radiates an entire spectrum, so does globalization, passing through locales, radiate a spectrum of differences. And I thought this is brilliant. So you've got a type of science communication coming from one place, whether it's from the West or from the rest of the world, wherever it may be. And as that passes different regions, it gets almost diffracted. And what happens is it refracts into these different forms. And depending on where it's gone and the nature of that situation that it's landed on, it will take on a slight different appearance. And I thought that's brilliant, because that's what we're trying to achieve. We're not saying that science communication should be the same everywhere. We're saying is that it should be able to be adaptive. It should be able to reflect upon itself, reflect on the situation it's in, and refract. Okay, so the idea is, how do we refract science communication? So another description that was used in the same paper, in the same book, was that locality is defined as experiencing the global locally or through local lenses. And these local lenses can include local power relations, geopolitical and geographical factors, cultural distinctiveness, and so on. So that made me realize this is what we need to look at, these local lenses. So what could be the local lenses that could affect science communication across the globe? So I'm just going to look at some questions. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so, okay, Sarah, so could you give also examples of globalization? For example, for the 3 different international formats we analyzed in the morning, Pint of Science, Fame Lab, and why is it so important, globalization? Good question, Sarah. So one example of globalization is IKEA. So IKEA has a product and they've distributed it globally. And as they've distributed, they've changed their advertising routines to suit localities. And these are generally marketing things. So this is done much in the industries where you want to sell things to more audiences than yourself. You change the advertising, you change the people in the advertising, the faces, what they look like, you change the languages to suit who they go to. Another really classic example is McDonald's. So McDonald's takes an idea and they want to go global, but obviously the idea of the Big Mac, a big beef burger, only works in some countries. In countries where beef is forbidden to be on the menu, you will not have a beef burger. And for McDonald's to correctly to sell there, they need to adapt. They need to be sensitive to localities. And so you go there and you'll find the same McDonald's, but you'll find a diffracted version or a refracted version. You'll find it takes on a slightly different hue depending on where it's gone. So that would be an example of globalization, Sarah. And within science communication, we're going to look at how we can localize on that level. I hope that helps. And we will find out why it's so important to localize as we move through. But at this point, I'd like to ask all of you a question. So if you can imagine science communication spreading globally, I'd like to know to you, what do you think would be the key things that affect localization? So what would be the most important lenses that would affect the communication of science within your region? So I do have a Mentimeter here. The link to this Mentimeter should be coming into the chat right now. And hopefully that will come up. Fantastic. So some of you are already entering. I'm just going to share the screen from this computer. Okay, so we can all see what's happening. Fantastic. Okay, so hopefully you're seeing that, and we've seen some wonderful ideas coming up. And you can put up to 3 ideas, you know, so as you see something might jump to mind and you might think, oh, actually, yeah, no, I was thinking that, and oh, in addition to that, maybe this, or maybe that. Fantastic, we've seen some interesting ideas here. So we've got poor infrastructure can affect it, yes, political influence, religion, yep, language, culture, government input, fantastic. Multicultural diversity, yep. Available materials, that's right, what you've got hold to. Proximity, economic status, politics again, income, yes. Big on the agenda, of course, is the language. One of the biggest lenses and biggest effectors of how things can be communicated and how you need to adjust your communication for different regions would be language. And so we can see language, culture, religion, habits, and literacy are high on the agenda. Ignorance, correct. So what people don't know. And on the other side is what they do know. Some of you may have included that. So basic education, policies as well again. Yes, venues for science, fantastic. The natural environment. Interesting. So the natural environment can affect, so the weather, the climate, the lay of the land, how you can move around, attitude toward dialogue. Oh, some great examples here. And please do, I'll leave this open. As we move on, feel free to add other ideas and thoughts to it. So as we look here, we can see there are many different things that, in our opinions, can affect the communication of science locally. So we're going to look at these now in a bit more detail. And to do that, I'm going to introduce an idea of 5 Ps. Now, I'd like you all to, at this point, please do grab a pen and some paper. You may have the workbook already. Within the workbook, there is a page that offers you 5 Ps and a space to fill it out. But it doesn't matter if you don't have the workbook. You just need a piece of paper and just to write down the P and then write down your idea after it. So let me introduce to you what I mean by the 5 Ps. And these are publics, practitioners, producers, places, and pillars. Now, this is something that I've put together, and you can see I've squeezed it into 5 Ps. And I'm always really hesitant about anyone who says, oh, this can all be conveniently summarized into things that all start with the same letter. And I'm thinking there's so many letters in the alphabet, this can't be accurate. Now, I'd just like to point out that this is my conception based on some of the things I've looked at and some of the things I've read, that I think they can mostly be contained within these. But if you can think of any others, please do let me know. This is not a final thing. And if you find that there are other things that are more relevant, please do include them. And you know, this isn't finite. This is a work in progress. Like I said, we don't really know what globally relevant means and what we're trying to do. We can just give a few examples, and broader examples would be talking about climate change, issues that affect us all, and COVID-19. These are globally relevant because everyone finds them relevant and we all have an interest in it. But other types of global relevance are taking ideas from across the world and talking about them within your environment. And so introducing people to ideas and ways of thinking that are not local and known normally. So all of this, I think, comes under global relevance. So now for the next 10 or 15 minutes, this is going to be an exercise of you thinking and writing and me just throwing words out. And now I know this does seem like a deficit approach, but my hope is this. As I go through each one of them, I want you to write down, based on your region, everything that comes to mind on how you think this affects science communication in your particular region. So if you work across Europe, I'd like you to just focus on the country that you're in or the country you have most experience with. So we want to be able to hear as much about a local perspective as possible. And after we've done this exercise, we'll all join together in groups to then discuss the differences and similarities between our countries. And my hope is that based on that, we'll be able to see how our challenges or approaches may be shown or seen in different countries, so that we can see which countries we share those attributes with. And then based on that, you know that if you have a problem that you think you cannot solve and is unique to your country, now you can see a colleague in another country who may be trying to solve the same issues. And then you have someone to consult or speak with to say, you know, how are you solving it over there? How can we use a global approach from you and embed it where we are? Okay, so that's the final hope. So please, for this next 10 or 15 minutes, all I want you to do is write down any thoughts that come to mind, no matter how important you feel they are, because everything will help in the end. So that's my introduction. I hope you've now got a pen and a paper, and off we go.
John, sorry to interrupt you.
Of course, please.
We have a question in the chat from
Oh,
Jim.
fantastic.
What do you mean by pillars? And I was wondering also about that, if you could elaborate a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that. So pillars are supporting organizations and things that support to keep up the ability to communicate science within that region. I will go into each of these now. So that's a great question. And so as we approach it, I'll give a quick description of what it is and then give some examples of things to consider. But that's a good question. And thank you. If I do miss anything, please do let me know. Producers will also be explained now as well. So I hope you're ready. Let's go. So let me just close this down. Okay. So when we speak about publics, what I want you to think about is, are there any common characteristics that may affect engagement? So in the region you're in, what are the typical attitudes towards science? Now, we are aware that everybody is an individual. You know, every culture, every country is built up of a unique arrangement of individuals. But still, people who live within those regions do notice something about their own societies, a general feel, a general idea, a general attitude, and maybe even multiple general attitudes. And there have been quite a few surveys that try to gauge this. For example, there are many national surveys to look at public attitudes towards science. They don't exist in every country, but you have, for example, in Europe, the Eurobarometer. And it helps to try and portray or get a rough idea of the differences between people's attitudes. And you can see on the whole, one country might be more supportive of science than another. And so these typical attitudes towards science are things that you may be experiencing on a daily basis in your science communication work. So just write down, do you feel that there are any typical attitudes towards science that affect your ability to communicate science within your region. Okay, and I just need to stress again, everything we're doing here is looking at your particular region. Are there any local norms? So are there any normal cultural habits or things that people do on a cultural level? What about languages? For example, in South Africa, where you have 11 or more different unique languages, how do you deal with this? Is this an issue? Have you got a way around it? Do you resort to English in your region? For example, I've spoken to colleagues in Nigeria who said we have many different languages, but most people resort to English. And this might be the case everywhere. Is this a problem? Are there any benefits? So what are the local norms within your region of language, culture, or anything else like that? Are there any behaviors that affect communication? And so do people generally like to go out on a Saturday and go to science museums? Is it that every Thursday, everyone has a 5-hour siesta? Are there any behaviors that you can think of that you feel affect the ability to communicate science in any way? And also consider, what is the science culture or science literacy like in your region? Are people highly educated in science? Is science on the school agenda? Are there any groups that don't have access to science or education for any reasons? And the world is so big, we have so much differences in this room, is that we'll have some places where the education system is very strong and science is embedded in the curriculum and there's many opportunities, and some other cultures where there might not be as many opportunities. And we wouldn't even speak of science literacy because we're still just trying to deal with just regular literacy on its own. So what is the science culture like? Do people think in a way that supports scientific thinking? For example, are they questioning? Are they accepting of authority? Is that a good or bad thing? Will they just take somebody's word and say, okay, they've said it, so it's true? Do they have authority structures? And so how is the culture and the way of thinking that could support a science culture within your region? And so these are just a few things, and please, you don't have to stick to these ones. Like I said, I just want you to think, how could publics affect the communication of science, or differences in publics affects them in your region? Okay, practitioners, just give you a second. So with practitioners, we're asking, what local engagement opportunities are there for publics? So this is more about where the public meets science, or the people that would mediate the public meeting science, or science meeting people. Who are the practitioners who help cultivate the messages from the world of science and scientific knowledge and other types of knowledge as well? But who are the practitioners who take this and put it in formats and means that are more palatable and engaging for different publics or different audiences? You can consider, what are their goals? Why do they communicate? Within your region, is the goal to increase youths getting into science careers? Is it to just get more children to take science at school, or to find science as something that they should spend time doing? Is it that you want to communicate science to change policy, so your audiences are mainly politicians? Is it that you really just want to increase the economic status of your nation? Do you want more people to make evidence-based decisions? So the goals of your practitioners may be really diverse, or it could be that most practitioners in your region always try to achieve the same outcomes. And this would affect the communication landscape that you may try and step into if you were to go into that region. How diverse are the practitioners? So what ethnicity are they? What genders are they? Do they have any disabilities? What backgrounds do they have? Do they all come from the city? Do any come from rural areas? Are they highly educated? Are any less highly educated, but nonetheless have a great connection with their audiences? So how diverse are they? And how diverse are their practices? Think about the methods practitioners use. Are they all journalists? Is it mainly journalists in your region? Do you have a lot of museums? Do you have a lot of space for freelance workers? Do they all follow the same type of practices? Do they do explosive demos? Do they all stand at the front of a stage and talk to people? Do they sit down like in science cafes and have dialogues? What are the practitioners' practices? What are the topics they cover? Do they all talk about the same things, like we always talk about space and dinosaurs? Or do they try and diversify and broaden the topics? And what are the types of styles? Are they very serious? Are they playful? Is there a nice mix? So how does this affect in your region science communication from your perspective? Okay, and we cannot know all of the what's happening in our own region, but we are just interested in your personal perspective and your experiences. What characteristics do public-facing scientists have? So this is the idea of the visible scientists. So not the scientists who are working on stuff separated and distant from society, but the scientists who step up to do those radio interviews, to do the blogs, to write the articles, the actual scientists who are trying to communicate with people and who people are seeing or hearing from. What are their characteristics? Are all of the scientists seen as old, white, Western, men? Is there a good diversity in them? Do they all talk in a serious way and always very sober, which has its benefits and its drawbacks? Are the scientists that are in the public all very playful? And are they only introduced because they are the more playful scientists? What type of scientists are in the public eye? And what impression are they having on the people that that are seeing them or hearing from them? And also, which I think is important, are your practitioners from a particular local population? So are your practitioners brought in from another country or another region, or are they from the local regions? Why? Why not? So I'll give an example. So I went to do some shows in Ireland, and we realized that 5 out of 6 of the presenters were from England. Only 1 was from Ireland. And we wondered why that would be. Where are all the Irish science communicators? And if there are some, why weren't they called along to do this event? And so these are all things just to consider. Who is represented in your science communication landscape? Okay, so beyond practitioners, now we get to producers. So some of you asked a bit about producers. So the producers are the people who produce the knowledge within your region. And most importantly, the knowledge that is most accepted or considered acceptable in your region. So what types of knowledge are dominant or valued locally? So often they're seen as a chauvinism towards scientific knowledge being the be-all and end-all of knowledge. And as science communicators, we might forget to incorporate other types of knowledge that can be important to us gaining a better perspective of the world around us. We often see that some places have types of knowledge that are dominant or valued locally. So some places put high confidence in scientific knowledge. Some places put higher confidence in the knowledge of local healers, in traditional knowledge. Knowledge that has helped them to survive for hundreds or thousands of years, that now science has come as a dominant way of understanding the world and getting certainty. We find conflicts. And as science communicators, we need to be sensitive of that and be prepared to accept and bring on and incorporate local knowledges with scientific knowledge. Because this is how we genuinely need to try and link with the communities that we're trying to serve. So what types of knowledge are dominant or valued locally? This will hugely affect how you communicate science. Is local research socially responsible? Are researchers doing research that are separate from the needs of society? Or is it things that society can look across and say, I'm really glad these scientists are doing that research because I can see the value in it for me? Is local research socially responsible? Does it respond to the needs of the society that it's in? An example of that would be if you lived on an island surrounded by a lot of ocean, you might be into marine science. You might find a lot of marine scientists. or if you were in a forested region, you might look strong at biodiversity of animals and plants. If you were in an agricultural region or rural region, the main types of science that might be research that might be responsive there would be research into agriculture. So how responsible is the science that's going on? What opportunities exist for citizens to be involved as scientists? And many of you are probably aware of citizen science. So is this a thing in your country? Is it an alien term that I've just introduced to you that you've never heard of? Are you aware of it, but you've never really looked into it? The reason this is important because citizen scientists can help to produce the knowledge. They can be involved in the scientific process to different levels. You can have a more surface level where they gather information and they provide it to scientists, but they're involved and maybe excited about being able to collect this information that can be useful to science. On a slightly deeper level, you can incorporate the citizens in the actual processing and doing of the science. So they don't just collect the information, you try and sit with them to actually work out what's being done, what it means, and how to utilize it best. Another level is to actually involve them in the agenda setting for scientific research. And that comes close to the social responsibility in that you ask citizens to sit down and think of what topics should be studied, think of a way to study it, think of how they'd collect the information, and then be prepared to sit and assist them in the processing of the information. So you work together as partners on the whole process. So how are citizens, or how can citizens be involved in your region? And another thing we shouldn't forget is the communication part. We don't have to separate the public from communication. We can involve them in the actual communication. We can ask citizens to sit with us and think, how would this best be communicated to your colleagues, to your family, to your friends? Would you like to help produce these outputs, produce these communications? Because we shouldn't separate the public and society. And so how much as producers are citizens involved in the production of scientific knowledge and the spreading? And are any fields of science more common in that region? And I've mentioned that already. For example, agricultural science, marine science, a telescope's been built in that area, so it might be science of space, astronomy, or it might be that there's a rich culture of looking at the sky. So there's many people interested in astronomy based on that. Any difficulties, challenges based on that? Okay, places. Okay, to look at places, the question would be, where do local publics typically engage with science or knowledge? So please do write down all your ideas here because we'll be sharing our perspectives afterwards to see how they overlap or differ around the globe. So what are common venues for science engagement? Do people generally go to museums? Are they highly attended? Do people prefer to get magazines? Do they prefer to access the internet? Where do people commonly get science in your region? Are there many science museums or science centers? Only a few? Do people go to local community centers or libraries? Where do people go? How accessible are these venues? Are they far away from where most people are? Are they only in urban areas? Are whole rural populations being left out? Are they on the inside of cities, on the outskirts of cities? How far are they? Is there one for every 500,000 people? Is there one in every city that requires a big journey? How easy is it to get there? Are the roads good? The transport links? Do you have to pay to get transport to get there? How accessible are they? Where do local groups usually meet? So despite where we might communicate science, the typical venues, where do local groups usually meet to share knowledge, to share ideas, and just to chat? What are the local community centers? Do people always meet indoors? Do people sometimes just meet out underneath a tree for a chat? What are the local community centers, and where do communities like to go within those localities? Because this will be different all over the world. And it's through recognizing that when we go to communicate science in those countries, we shouldn't assume that we'll get our message across to the particular groups we want. by just going to a museum or going to certain places. We have to think about how these places are used. Is the internet a realistic option? Is there good connection? Is there constant electricity? I know currently for a while now, South Africa has been having only partial parts of the day where electricity is cut off. And in some places, electricity isn't even a thing. And so if you want to reach certain environments and communicate certain ideas, you have to be wary of whether electricity will be an issue for you. Can you plug in your laptop? Do you have the battery power? Can your activity be done without electricity? How can we adapt to those differences? And how are communicators adapting within those regions? And alignment with intended audiences, that's saying when you go to a particular place, is it something that aligns with the people's views and ideas and opinions? For example, some museums have strong colonial histories. And if you are of a colonized people, it might be a place that historically you've been totally turned off by. And so we cannot assume that by going into a museum, we will attract those individuals. So we have to be sensitive to these things and how they are different in different countries. So how is that for you? Is this a problem in your area or is it not? Now, finally, we get to pillars. And this is the one that most people think, pillars, what do you mean? And mainly it's about the support networks. If you look at the map that you've all been contributing to that shows your opportunities and challenges in your region around the globe, you'll see that many people share the same problems. Not necessarily for the same reasons, but they share the same problems. Funding was normally one of the highest agendas that repeats everywhere. We don't have enough funding, but there are some countries and some nations that do have funding. And even though they have lots of funding, they'll still complain about not having enough funding. So funding's generally an issue everywhere, but for different reasons. So is there much funding available specifically for science communication in your region? What type of training is available to support science communicators? Is there much training in your region? Is it academic training? Is it formal training? Is it non-formal training, such as this workshop here? What type of training is available? Also, what is the access to digital technology like? Can people access computers, mobile phones, internet? Is this a thing or not? Do you have support networks within your country or infrastructure to allow science communication to occur, grow, or happen in an easy or making it more difficult way? Is public communication supported by the government or industries? Do businesses want more science communication and public engagement? Does the government support it nationally in policy and the acts they do? Is public communication supported in academia? Does your university support you communicating science? Does your professor feel that this is something you shouldn't do? You should just stick to the science that you're doing and not communicate it? What is the academic agenda? Do you feel supported by it? Do you feel like they're a pillar for you, or do you feel like they're a hindrance? And is there a scientific society or academy of science in your nation? Often they can be a good port of call. Their role is to promote science, especially within society and amongst each other, other scientists. So to what extent is there a scientific society or academy or institution that can support science communication in your region? Now, I know that was a lot of information and I know that was a lot of talking. I'm 100% aware of that. But I felt I needed to do that to try and really get across the idea of how can we think about the different P's or the different ways of localizing things within our relative regions. Because it isn't obvious and it's hard to work out how we would adapt our practices to fit different local regions. But now I'm hoping that through what you've written down, we'll be able to share these ideas with each other and these situations to learn from the differences and similarities across the globe. So, having said that, there's a quick look at all of the P's next to each other. The next exercise we're going to do is we're going to go into groups. And so before we do that, I am going to give everybody a break to just relax and get a breather, because I know that was a lot of information. And so to clear your minds and let it regroup. And while you're doing anything, give them a cup of tea, cup of hot chocolate, coffee, maybe 5 coffees after that. I'd like you to just sit in the back of your mind and think about this question. What does it mean to be globally relevant? Is it really to be local, to link global science communication with local needs? How do my local needs impact upon science communication? Because these are the things that we're going to be comparing after the break. So I think we'll go and then come back from the break, and then I'll split up the breakout rooms. So please do take 10 minutes. We'll be looking at all of this after the break, and I will see you back here shortly. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to have a break. Okay, so at this point, we are going to go back to the 5 Ps, but now we're going to reflect on them within groups. And so I'll quickly give you breakout rooms now, but please don't leave yet, so I'll describe what you'll be doing and what you'll be finding. So in the chat, I'll just post a link to a Padlet. And so this link is for everybody to join, and this will provide the main place where everyone will be working from and that we'll be learning from in this next 45 minutes or so, half an hour to 45 minutes. So here is the link. It's the Padlet. So I hope everyone has managed to see that. And just to give you an idea, there it is as well. So if you find it easier to use the QR code, please do. But this exercise is about global solutions for local challenges and local solutions for global challenges. Now, the idea is that each of you will have local challenges that you try to deal with on a daily basis. Some of you may have less experience in science communication. So these are the challenges that you will be coming up against in the future. Challenges that you may not have even been aware of that may cross your path in the coming weeks, months, or even years. But the idea is that even though you have local challenges, what solutions exist around the globe? Who else is trying to deal with these problems that you can learn from? And hopefully through doing this exercise, we'll be able to identify that. And it's also about local solutions for global challenges. So not only looking out to find global solutions, it's that you recognize your own solution that you have, and you see that this could be applied on more of a global level. For example, a global challenge where everybody's going through issues of funding and can't afford to do science communication. You might say humbly that, well, in my region, we have no money and no funding, but we do it regardless. And we do it this way, and we make this difference. And it might inspire many people around the globe to realize, actually, the funding we thought we needed to do that, we actually don't need that much funding for this. Often it comes down to infrastructure and the state of different elements within your nation, but that is when we get really fine-tuned to the particular differences. So there's the Padlet. When you join the Padlet, this is what you'll see. You'll see a page with different rooms. If you go to the room that of your breakout room, you can click on it on the plus. When you click on the plus, this box in the bottom right will open. And on that, I'd like you in the top part where the yellow arrow is to write down which P you're talking about. So public or pillar or practitioner, etc. Then underneath it, I'd like you to write down anything that seems really interesting or remarkable from your conversations with your colleagues. For example, if you've got a colleague from UK and US and Brazil, and you realize that you all have the similar issue of science journalism as practitioners, whether it's an opportunity, a strength, or it's a weakness or less of a strength, you'd write it there and say, wow, this is what our countries have in common. We are all struggling with this. And even if you might even have a solution, we struggle with this and we tried this and it works, or we try this and it doesn't work. The idea is to learn about the commonalities between your regions and see how you can solve these issues together and learn from other approaches. So if you could go through and do this for each of the 5 Ps. So start, maybe you can do them in any order you want, but just start, open up and say, right, publics, and then have introduce yourselves first so you know who each other are and the countries you're from, and then just have a chat about what you wrote down and see if anyone else relates to it as well. And anytime it does, please do write it in. It's okay for anyone that needs to leave and come back, that's fine, because this will be going on for half an hour. I'll give you plenty of time to work together on this, because I found from previous sessions that you guys want to talk about it. You really enjoy this, and I just regret not being in all of the rooms. So I may actually come and join you just to say hello and see how you're doing. But please do now. I'm going to give you the breakout rooms. And remember, we're looking at localization from the perspective of 5 different Ps. And I just like you to think about the strengths or limitations. And one other important thing I should recognize is we should also think what's in it for them. So when we want to localize through these 5 Ps, what is in it for the particular people or companies that represent this? And what do producers get from it? What do practitioners get? What do publics get? Why would they want to pair with you to localize? Okay, so there'll be breakout rooms of roughly 5 people or more, and please enjoy and introduce yourselves and work on the 5 Ps. Okay, fantastic. Nice to have you back. And I really like this activity. I think possibly this could be the most useful activity amongst it all, but it really all does depend on how you all can make use of it. And this isn't something that I can find out in a workshop. This isn't something that I can find out in the coming weeks or even months. This is something that will occur over the following year, depending on all of your situations. So I'm just going to share my screen on the other side. And rather than me presenting it, I'd just like to go through each of the rooms for you to just point out what you think were some major things that stuck out to you, and major ideas, challenges, opportunities that you feel you realized as a result of doing this exercise in your group. Okay, so let's begin with room 1, unless there's anyone who particularly has something they want to share. Then please do, and you can volunteer. But if not, I will start at room 1 and just work our way through. Okay, so room 1, and if you could give us a little idea about the countries that you, the context you are speaking from, so I can, just so we can highlight and see who's that. So who was in room 1? Would any of you like to introduce?
Yeah, I can quickly share. I have to be honest, we got stuck on question 1. So we spent a lot of time talking about publics, which was really, really rich and interesting. And I think we all learned a lot from each other. So we were talking about Germany, Portugal, Cameroon, South Africa, and Malta. Okay. And I think there was quite a mix in a sense. Many people were very, so I think in Cameroon, people were maybe curious, but I think maybe still, maybe not super positive yet. And maybe South Africa was similar, and so was Malta. And I think we had a lot of talking about, like, how can we reach these different publics, and what are the challenges and the positives that we see. And there were some really important conversations around the challenges of trying to communicate when things are unreliable, and how do you manage that challenge.
Okay, and when you say unreliable, do you mean things like internet connections? Do you mean about people turning up?
Yeah, power and things like that as well. That was kind of briefly condensing what we spoke about.
So, no, that's fantastic. And it's interesting because and what I found is, even though I've given them different Ps, you always remember that categories are often artificial. Life is just life, and everything kind of mixes together. And so when you talk about internet and connectivity and energy use, I kind of put that under pillars, the things that support the ability. Regardless of any intentions that anyone's got. If you've got no electricity, that's not an option. And I find it really interesting, even in these events, people have to drop out and come back in, internet connections, loss of power, and many other reasons, even family, children coming running in. And depending on the culture you're from, you may be able to afford a nanny, or you might have opportunities for your children to be looked after as a culture, as a community. And so our individual differences create these vast differences in the ability to just communicate science. So I think it's a great conversation you had. And being stuck in Publix isn't a problem. To me, it's whatever's most important to you. I mean, it's to start the dialogue around what do we have in common? What are the issues we share? How do you solve that issue? And that's the key other question. How do you solve that in your region? And could we adopt that? What would be different? Okay, let's look at room 2. And if you have a chance, if you've still got the Padlet open and you haven't included the countries, if you could just add the countries, that would be amazing. But if not, I will add them as you start discussing. So that'd be amazing. Okay, so room 2, does anyone want to share their experiences?
Can do.
Thank you.
I was waiting in case somebody else would call first. But I guess, yeah, we had some similar concerns around access because of electricity, because of network, that sort of thing, which seemed that the solution was to, for example, try and put more face-to-face events up rather than online ones, but then there might also be whole locations that will tend to be avoided for these events because they're, notorious for not having electricity, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then we went on to talk quite a bit about language issues. One issue being in places like South Africa, where there's like multiple languages and maybe not everything translates directly, or there isn't exactly what you call it, a thesaurus, to move things, the dictionary,
yeah,
to translate things, which again came up originally around South Africa, but actually there are issues in other places like the UK as well, with the love for abbreviations, and which can be excluding for others. And so we thought around solutions that are now being used, which might be things like artistic performances or animations, or just offering training to scientists to teach them how to speak in lay language, or if it's about lab and experiments, try to use demonstrations of these more than just descriptions. But then that still left us with the issue of how can people give feedback to or question what they're seeing, what they're listening, if they can't quite communicate or not understand. And then again, we spoke quite a bit about gender inequality, and that related both to those who produce scientists, to those who communicate science, and so who these people are, but also how are they perceived. So that maybe if it's a female scientist or a female communicating science, and may not be perceived as knowledgeable or as reliable as a man. And sorry, I should have mentioned our countries were South Africa, Portugal, Sierra Leone, and the UK.
Yeah, I've got it down here, yeah.
And then, went into funding, specifically funding for science communication, which seems to be lacking in most places, but also where there are opportunities to include that in bigger grant applications. Sometimes scientists will not have the training to think about it proactively and plan quite specifically, so that it's just a line on a grant application, and then it's too late at the end to think about it, and you'd have to apply for more money in different places, etc., etc. So I think there's common issues, even if they have like a local expression of them, but certainly we shared quite a lot of this.
Yeah, I think that was a fantastic summary, and I think many of the people here maybe resonated with one or more of those issues. And that's the thing, is the idea that when we do science communication, we can't assume all of our situations are the same, but there are absolutely overlaps. And some people come up with really unique solutions that we would never have considered. But we're just not learning from each other. And it's not just research that we should learn from, because the research, to be fair, is catching up with the practice. And so we need to look at what practitioners are doing, and then also find ways to link that with research, so we can find out what works, what's the best alternatives, best practices, or just common practices, if they're not even established as the best yet. Can I ask if any rooms in particular would like to go next? Because I realize when I do it in order, there's a tendency to run out of time by the time you get to the end, depending on how you do it. So if anyone would like to speak, let me know now. Otherwise, I'll do it in order. And if you don't get to speak, I apologize. I'm just looking in the chat to make sure that no one's mentioning anything. Okay. Okay, so let's go to room 3. So South Africa and the Netherlands, Portugal and Uganda. So yes, would anyone from room 3 like to contribute? You can all contribute as well if you like. You can say particular points and add anything that you think you need to or want to. Oh, and might I just add, if anyone, when someone else is presenting, has a question or think there's an interesting point, please do just put up your hand and feel free to ask them a question. Because I think, as I put in the disclaimer at the start of the first session, I really would like everyone to be able to feel open to speak about their issues, their challenges, and to learn from others. So please do share. Okay. Room 3? Anyone? Oh, thank you. Okay, so let's see, Sarah. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, but I don't know if you want to go to the group 3 instead. I had the general question, not dealing with my group.
Oh, no, that's fine. You please enter a general question as well. That's fine.
Because we discussed the idea of the globally relevant things and whatever, and they were thinking about, and we said for sure that sharing practices and learning by each other is in itself something which is an added value for our work. But when you was talking to the morning, I was thinking about that there is something global, and we need to adapt, for example, FameLab or other things, other ideas. I read an article about something happening in UK, which is always in front of us, and then I adapt to Italy. But I was thinking also that, for example, Ayana, I think from Ghana, was in our group. An issue which is typical of many science museums is that, as Emily Dawson said, that people, we tend to exclude people. People who come to science museums are already interested in science, have a good level, are blah, 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 blah. And so, let's say, maybe a way to listen better to the people who doesn't have access to culture, science in Milan or in small countries, maybe I can find a solution to this from Ghana or from another country. So by the globalization, I can be more able to afford the diversity which is in my community. So not thinking about what's typically Italian, but because our society is so much global, and we are not so aware of the diversity which is inside. Maybe by experience in other countries, in other continents, I can understand better the woman who lives close to my door. So I would make the other side of the globalization. So going global for understanding something which is very local and I don't see and not able to understand. But
Yeah.
maybe I'm out of topic, but it was a great idea for me. I discovered something now. It's so stupid, maybe.
No, this is the whole point, is that when I go back to the thing, when you ask what is global relevance, people don't know because no one's really tried to think about it. How can we learn from each other? And I put a little reference to how can local be used to solve global problems and how can global be used to solve local problems? And it works both ways. And just like globalization is seen as spreading from rich, dominant countries to countries that don't have as much, and they're instilling their ideas and trying to control, this is how it should be done, and people are being put out of business, it works the other way. We need more local ideas becoming globalized. But it's just because of epistemic issues, people don't necessarily value the knowledge coming from these cultures and people. It doesn't get to reach these more dominant cultures. And we have the opportunity to change that just by opening our doors and looking out and being in contact and asking questions. And this is the relevance of this, is that if we don't feel that is something we can do, it might not be something we ever do. And I'm a freelancer. I've got a really wonderful world to freelance in the UK. If I go into another country, I've heard some people saying, how can I find a job in science communication? And the real truth is that some countries just don't have the infrastructure. They don't have enough people who can pay you to do this. They don't have the libraries that can have funding from the government to pay you to come into their event. They don't have a government science festival on. And I would ask here, put up your hands, just give me a thumbs up if you know of a museum, a science museum in your country, in your whole country. Does your country have a science museum? Okay, and you can use a thumbs up or a hands up. Now, we take this for norm and the normality, but now I'm going to ask the opposite question. Can you give me a thumbs up if you feel that you don't have a science museum or science center that is within reach? So does anyone here feel that they don't have a science center or a science museum in reach? Okay, so there's at least one, it's two. So here's the thing, the assumption that science museums are everywhere and everyone can access them isn't even a thing. Some people don't even have access to that, let alone there is one and I'm just not going to go because it's not for me. And Emily Dawson's paper about that, she pointed out that, you know, thinking about barriers isn't enough. Just removing the barrier of it's expensive to go there doesn't make it more diverse, the people who go there. They realize that the same people go, just more of them. So the same middle class, the same people, the same interest, they turn up, it doesn't increase. And so when we're trying to find solutions, when we're trying to find different ways of approaching things, we need to look beyond our doorstep and the normal solutions. When we want to reach certain communities, hard to reach communities, we need to understand where those communities come from, about their local contexts, about the things that may get in the way, prevent them or promote them doing science. Then we need to incorporate it in our practices. For me, that's being globally relevant. It's understanding things on a global perspective, not just from what we know. So we've got about 7 minutes to the end now, and I'm just going to present. Sorry if we couldn't get through any more of the examples, but this Padlet is open for all of you to view. And if you scroll all the way to the end of the Padlet, you can see that there's responses from other groups as well. So I can go right across here and you can see that beyond there, we've got session 3 and some of the views that they had. And you can look at session 2 as well. And so you can see, what are other people thinking? What solutions, what commonalities did they have? Is there a country here that I didn't realize I should really be in contact with to understand a bit about how to deal with this issue? Okay, and we will talk about issues of intersectionality and diversity within the JEDI modules. That's where we get really into those issues. But I haven't gone too much into them here because I need to separate the knowledge the best way I can. So please do check out this Padlet in your own time, use it, update it, and you know, please just learn from each other. That's the biggest thing I can ask. And so here is a WhatsApp group link. So if you want to stay in contact, please join the WhatsApp group. It's an interim, just an initial place where we can say, hello, everybody. I think if we start with WhatsApp, then you can quickly just send a message and say, hi, everyone, I'm looking for this. And then tell me if there's a preferred place where you'd like to link up. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly move on to one more slide, actually, which is an idea, really, and an approach. And so this idea is absolutely subject to your thoughts and opinions. And in the workbook, I've called it a 7-step guide. And that doesn't mean do one, then the other, then the other. It really just means what types of things can we remember or try and consider if you want to take a globalized approach, where if you want to be thinking about global issues and local issues and combining them to really focus on science communication. Now, there are things that I couldn't contain within this workshop. For example, how to set SMART goals. It takes time to practice it. And so the first thing we should think about is setting goals. what communication goal do we have? Why are we communicating? What do we hope to achieve from it? And what specific global audience are we working with? So generally in science communication, we would think of a specific audience, but when we're thinking of global science communication, I would say, think about which area of the globe, what type of people are you trying to access? And then once you can think about that, you can start looking into all of the nuances of those people and in their opinion, not in our opinion, in that they believe. Another thing, so set SMART goals if possible, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound. And I did provide a link on how to set SMART goals. You can look at many things online, but that can really strengthen what you're doing. Then gather knowledge about your intended audience to identify opportunities and challenges for communicating with them. You can use available research, national surveys, reports, or direct experience working with them. And I've given links on all of the P's. I've also included a few words at the end, and those words are actually, they're links to research papers that are national surveys on different publics, or national surveys on practitioners, or on science and producers. And there's a bunch of other papers, but I think we can share these. If anyone wants them, you can ask me and I can just share them as and when, or as a network, we can share each other's papers that we're aware of. Now, these three things, consult, partner, these are parts of knowledge. So if you can't gather the knowledge in those ways, why not consult someone from those areas? Consult a local. Consider the 5 Ps, so you can consult any of them, or even better, partner with them. And then I'll show you this in a second. Consider adjusting your approach based on what you know and what you learn. So don't be fixed upon the same approach. Be prepared to adjust and adapt. Be reflective and reflect upon your activities, what worked, what didn't work, what could be done better, what could be adjusted. Always be prepared to adjust. And that could even involve going back and realizing that you have to adjust your goals because you previously intended to speak to the public to change their voting habits, when you realize you might have needed to speak to the politicians, or you might have wanted to speak to the politicians, but you've realized that the politicians don't know how to communicate. You've told them the message, but really it's the public that you need to convince to get them to vote the right politicians in. So the idea is that we always have to be reflexive and think about how we can adjust to be more effective at what we do. And then you want to select your activities to suit the audience that you're trying to reach. Make sure the activities match the needs, the wants, the priorities, the differences of those 5 Ps. Think about who you're trying to meet, what activities are best to reach them, what places would you use, what pillars can support you in reaching them. Is it that you want a local community center, which would be a pillar of their community? Would it be a local leader who has a lot of reputation, a lot of authority in the region? So you need to think about these people and how you can work with them or consult them. And finally, you would translate. The best way to get your way across to other cultures in a globally relevant way is to translate. And if you want to be more globally relevant, you might use more popular global languages, so languages that many people use, so you can reach many communities. Or you might want to be specific and translate to that specific environment. And to do that, again, you would consult or partner. A rough way to look at all of these, this isn't hard and set in stone, and you feel free to critique it or change it as you want, is that you start with goals, you raise your knowledge to see if how to inform your goals, then you produce activities, and then with those activities, you would translate them finally to meet the audience. But when you do your activities, always be prepared to adjust, constantly adjust them to make them better. And you always go back and think about your goals. But really, this isn't something you should follow exactly the way I've shown here. It's just an example of how you'd use these different considerations. You constantly reflect, constantly go back, be prepared to adjust. Now, this knowledge, this line at the top is more of a surface level. If you want to go a bit deeper into your relevance, you'd go through the consultations, speaking to people on a surface level. And if you really want to get deep, you would partner with people in those communities so that you can really develop something with them and for them, from them, not just to them or from above. So all of this will be available after. and you're free to use them, adapt them, download them however you need. They will be available at the end of the project because we have to officially finish it and publish them in a particular place, where I will do any changes or tweaks as a result of your feedback. So please do offer your feedback, even if it's a criticism on something you think you didn't have enough time for, or that maybe we should use more examples from here and you can provide them. Whatever I can do to adjust them in a reasonable time, I will do. And then the final resources will go up for open access for everyone to use. So that has been Global Relevance in Science Communication. Thank you all for joining, and all my very best.